beginning of this year, and actually at the end of last year, Peggy DeVeni came to me and she said that she really wanted to increase student choice within outside reading. And then this year, Peggy DeVeni moved into being the head of the English department, and she really encouraged her department to have at least one semester of open choice reading.
I had heard feedback from so many students about how even giving them a selection of, like, here's a list of approved novels for you to read, really was, to quote the kids, like killing their love for reading. They didn't like the idea of having to pick something from a list or having a book assigned to them. So it was seniors, it was fourth quarter, and if I wanted to have buy-in at all, I knew I had to give them a lot of choice. So the team and I decided that yes, you get to pick whatever book you want, as long as it fits our unit theme, which was a transition to adulthood, had to be a minimum of 150 pages, and parents had to sign off on it. And that last part was very important. So we created a form, and that was the impetus for why we decided to do it.
And then we also tell them, you don't have to keep it. Like, if you get into it and you're like 20 pages in and go, this is the worst thing I've ever read in my life, take it back. And so that's one of the nice things about choice is, you know, they have full choice. They can read it. They don't like it, they can read something different, but we tell them they have to have a book, and then they have to be able to finish an assignment or project or discussion or whatever we do by the end of the quarter.
I think I talk about like the books I'm reading, and also how I list, like I read books in different modalities. Like I will listen to audiobooks all the time, and I talk about that with the students, the required books that we do have. We also listen, like I mix it between I read, audio read, they read. So it lets them know that there's different options.
Okay, so something else that we do all throughout the year to just sort of introduce students to different authors, different genres, is we do something called First Chapter Fridays. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. It's usually 15 to 20 minutes max. I usually have gone on to Sora, and I have rented the audiobook version and the digital book version of some sort of book, whatever kind of genre, anything like that. And I project everything up here, and then I have First Chapter Fridays worksheets. They're basically like structured doodling. It's awesome. We get colored pencils out, we get crayons, we get markers, the whole shebang. And it really is just asking for their own thoughts and feedback about what we've read, what questions they have, what inferences they can make. Usually they rate the first chapter on a scale of like 1 through 5, how much they enjoyed it. And then that's also helpful for me because I go back through them, and if it's one they really liked, then I can go back and like make a note of this is a book they might be interested in, or like add it to their recommendations. Or same thing, if they really did not like it, I'm like, cool, good to know. They're not interested in this type of book. But it's a great way to introduce, again, different authors, different content. But I usually will do a book trailer Tuesday as well. And that's, again, just a quick 5 to 10 minute thing. I find book trailer usually on the YouTube of a book that, again, I think might be appealing to a lot of our kids. And again, they get to watch it, take a little bit of feedback, and just kind of engage and interact with different kinds of narratives and different kinds of stories, which is really great. They get invested. Every now and then we don't get to do First Chapter Friday for a reason, and by the end of the year they're like, why? And I'm like, guys, we'll do it on Monday. I'm sorry, we'll do it on Monday. But again, that makes my little teacher heart really happy. So that's something that grows on them throughout the year, and they end up enjoying a lot.
Something I found online that's called a book tasting, where you give kids a bunch of different books and they mill around, and it's with any time you look at a new book, they look at the cover, they read the first little bit, they might look at a review and decide, oh, maybe this is a book I would like to read. And giving some time for them to look at books, go to the library, check them out. A lot of kids have books that they want to read, and so then they always ask, well, can I bring this book from home? Yeah, of course you can. But I think it's also just giving them exposure to a lot of different types of books.
There's a lot of research that shows that if we want to get students invested, not just in reading, but in learning overall, student choice is a pivotal key within that element. And
I've always been a reader, and reading has always had great value in my life. And I recognize that even though we were reading things with our students in classrooms, short stories, novels, etc., students weren't reading enough. And I also noticed that a lot of students, they would say things like, oh, I stayed up really late last night to finish this book, or I didn't do this assignment because I was reading my book. And I have a lot of students who love to read and they value that. And I wanted to honor that.
I think just student choice reiterates that, or like really supports students being kind of invested in what they're reading. In and of itself lends itself to accessibility on its own, because my students who English is not their first language, or my students who maybe are dyslexic, or again, my students who just don't like reading, they're gonna gravitate a lot more to a graphic novel, or maybe several issues of a comic series, or a novel in verse that has less text. And that's just more accessible for them, and they're gonna have more success with that. So again, like, why not?
What I do is I tell the kids, pick a book. I don't care what book, but it always starts with a book talk with our librarian, and she'll introduce them to 5, 6, 7 books. And then she always has them right there so the kids can just go, oh, I want that, and take it.
Yeah, so we just come in and I say, okay, does everybody have their book? We sit down and I start the timer, and for the first little bit I might have to remind kids or ask them to put their phones away, but it doesn't take long. You know, here we are at the end of quarter 1, and every day, even my juniors, some of them the other day we didn't read because we had to start something, and they were all disappointed and said, oh, we're not reading today. It was a great moment.
As seniors, we did do all the reading in class. At first it was harder, but then they really got into it. And it would just be like, first thing they knew, they would just come in, grab their book, sit down, and we actually read too. So we were modeling reading, and it was actually really nice to sit down and just read a book.
So after we take the district RI, I have them do a student reading inventory. It asks them, do you enjoy reading? Do you not enjoy reading? It gives them a scale so they can pick a number. And it's like, how much time do you spend reading? But it also asks them what kind of genres and stories they like, even if they're not a big fan of reading. Like, what kind of TV shows do you like? What kind of movies do you like? So at the very beginning of the year, I have them fill those out. And then it takes a little bit of time, not too much, but a little bit of time. But I go through and I read them, and I list 2 to 3 recommendations at the top of their page for each of my kids. That way, when we go to the library, if you're totally lost, you can at least have an author to go check out, that lines up with what you're reading. So that was really helpful, just because it gives them a starting place.
Then we spend some time on Friday reading, and then when we get together and do circles or talk about it, it's very general questions and conversations, like, okay, what's the theme? And so people talk about their theme. Well, how do these themes connect? So it's always trying to connect the literature, no matter what they're reading.
I had them, for example, map the plot of the book that they were reading so far, and then we did a quick, some people call it speed booking. I just paired them up, and then they basically shared their plot with each other, and then would rotate through, and the conversations lasted a minute, so it moved really fast. So they got to hear about different plots of books, and they got to talk about the things that they're reading. So, and it also helps with those speaking and listening skills as well. And then when we were talking about characterization, so rather than have them look at a character from another text, they analyze the character from one of their books that they were reading or had recently read. And so sometimes it's also with their writing notebooks, describe the setting that you're interacting with in your book.
So on some days they might have journal entries about their book,
Right.
which is a really low stakes way of
Exactly.
assessing their reading.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely. And here I'm planning on having, here at the end of the quarter, reading conferences with them about what they've read, their progress.
Also, I let them have choice in assessment too. Here's our goal, here's a list of options for how you can present this information. How can I tell that you have met the standards that we're trying to assess? Because I have found that, especially with seniors, giving them choice and allowing them to best demonstrate their abilities in their strength area really helps them be successful and have more of a buy-in in the class.
I also have literature circles that I put together. Like they're traditional little literature circles. And then the cards that I'll give them, they say, this is your job. And then on the front, it has some sentence frames for them. So if they need the sentence frames, they don't have to think too hard.
Yeah. So there's this like support for them when they're having discussions.
Yep. And it's on the back. So if they don't want it, they don't have to look at it.
I probably check in with each student every couple of weeks, just kind of on how things are going with their book, how they're feeling about it. Is that the book, right, that they feel like they can finish? And a lot of times I'll do that just during kind of independent work time as I'm cycling through the classroom and just checking on how they're doing and answering questions. I just try to take time to touch base with them on that as well.
It's a great time to decompress. They come from wherever they have in the school or from whatever class program, and I think it helps them refocus. And some people would argue, okay, well, you could use that valuable time for some other form of instruction. I don't agree, because I think that it is valuable instruction, and they're choosing. Students need choice, and they don't get that often, and they don't get a time where they can come and choose and connect with something that's of value to them.
We have kids who will start a series because Mrs. Scott likes to start them in a series, and then they just keep going. And then usually when they end, they'll talk to Miss Scott and go, okay, I really liked this series. What do I read now? And then she knows exactly where to send them. So it just keeps going.
And I had kids last year, and again, it was fourth quarter seniors was the first time we really tried it. And I had students who had struggled all year with barely passing, and they got so into their books and so into their passion project too, that they knocked fourth quarter out of the park. And I also had kids who were like, I hadn't read a book since middle school, and they read 2 in that time. Because if they finished their book, I let them get another one, and then they got bonus points because they read through a book. And there was a project involved with it as well at the end, but it kind of sparked kids' love of reading again, because it let them pick, and they could pick things they were interested about.
So what that's done for my library and for what we've seen here is from last year to this year, we have had over 1,000 additional book circulations than we did from last year at this time. And 1,000 book circulations, like in a given year, most libraries circulate anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 books. In January, we have already circulated more than 4,000 books, which is absolutely incredible. But the thing that I love even more than that is the conversations that I'm having with students about reading, as well as the conversations that I'm overhearing students have with each other. I've had students tell me as I've checked in books, this is the first time since I've been in elementary school that I've ever read a book. And this is the first time that I've actually read it and I liked it. And do you have the sequel in the series? And so for me to be able to see that change with students has been absolutely incredible. And then we've also noticed like a lot of students who have never checked out a book, check one in, check another one out. But then I've also heard a lot of really positive things coming from English teachers themselves, where all of a sudden their students are engaged with the reading time that they give them, and where teachers are overhearing students talk about books with each other, where students are recommending books to each other before class and after class without being prompted to talk about books. And so we're seeing these positive effects happen not just here, but within all of the Alta community.
When my students come into my room and they sit down and they read for 10 minutes and that timer goes off and I say, okay, now I need you to do this. And they're focused and they're ready and we can actually get right into the lesson. I don't have to get their attention. It's a pattern. They know exactly what's expected of them. The room is calm. I am calm. It is just a great way to start the class.
I would say just start it. Even if you don't have an assignment, you don't have a plan, just say, we're gonna read a book. It's still beneficial to the kids, and you can always see how it's working and then be like, okay, now next quarter or next semester, we're gonna do this again, and now we're gonna add this to it. And the kids will be more likely to jump in, especially when they know it's not high stakes and it's like, oh, I get to read anything.
I think the best thing that an English teacher can do in order to have this process start is to first reach out to their librarian and see if they can schedule a time for book talks. So even if they've never brought their classes into the library before, I can guarantee that librarians will be ecstatic about having students come in to explore books.
We're working with Amanda in the library. She's going to do book talks because I think that really helps when you're giving student choice, because oftentimes a lot of the kids don't spend much time in a library, and when you give them freedom of choice, they get decision paralysis and they don't know how to pick. So if you have somebody in your library who can really talk up books, it helps.
Just try it. You know, I mean, I think the thing is you have to relinquish some control and invite a little chaos, and that's okay. There's low stakes with simple assignments that you can do along the way. And even if you just start small, you know, and maybe if you don't have your kids read every day, you could have a set day a week that they read, and maybe do a reading and then a journal entry or something. And that would be a pretty low stakes way of getting kids involved with reading and doing it consistently.
And I guess something else that's worth noting is that we do send home parent guardian approval forms home, so that we have that documentation that parent guardians know what their students are reading, that they've checked it off with them, like all of that good stuff to make sure that everything's fine.
Student choice reading gets the kids excited, or at least motivated to read. And if they learn nothing else in my class, I want them to enjoy reading a book.
It's been a really rewarding experience for me because my favorite thing about my job is talking with students about books.
And that's really valuable, to not only have my students read, but to help build those relationships.
And if my goal as their ELA teacher is to get them reading more, and I have the opportunity to let them choose, then why wouldn't I?